everyone, and thank you for joining. The title of this event is the Key to Success for Product Management. And yeah, the panel will basically highlight the insights and experiences that they've gone through. These are two incredible product leaders that we've got here as guests. And yeah, they'll be rediscussing some of the trends and challenges they're seeing within the fintech product space in general. But yeah, in terms of the event's purpose, so I'm lucky here. My name is Raman. I've been sort of a fintech product recruiter here for nearly 2 years now, and I speak to hundreds of product professionals every single week. And a key theme that really comes up is actually people looking for more advice and keys in terms of for career trajectory and their growth. And so I wanted to be able to give back a little bit and try and speak to some people and try and share that out there. So in the last 10 years, product roles have really become, a real key success for fintechs worldwide as these startups are scaling. And so we really want to kind of dive a bit deeper into that in this short webinar. And so, yeah, I'd love to just introduce our two guests at the moment and their respective companies. So I'll just pass it over to Simone.
Hi there, I'm Simone Collins, Director for Product at Greenlight. Pleasure to meet you all.
Hello, I'm Erik Lamb, VP of Product at Zero Hash.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. So yeah, this is always an interesting one, but I'd love to just find out. I think a really good starting point is always, what was it that made you decide to pursue a career in product management? You've both got really interesting backgrounds in terms of coming out of college and things like that. So it'd be good to understand why product management and what made you kind of want to pursue that.
Erik, you want to go first?
Oh man, I was going to say ladies first, but okay. So yeah, I mean, I think like most people on this call or listening to this, most of us don't go into product management by default. There's not really a path out of college to do it. So I kind of started in product really out of frustration. I was working with a lot of business and technical teams, and I just got really frustrated that I didn't have enough control over what was going to be sold or what the end customer was going to see. And so I kind of, I was actually running business strategy and operations at the time, and some data science teams and things like that. And my frustration just grew. And so I went to the chief product officer of the company I was working for, and I said, hey, this is something that I'd maybe like to make a transition in. And then fast forward a few months, he came to me and he said, hey, we're going to be doing some restructuring. Would you take over some of this? And so I just landed in it and had to figure it out. But yeah, I think a lot of people probably join product or go into product in very similar ways. Like, there's unique ways to think about product problems, and people that their brains are kind of wired a certain way, I think are a natural fit for product management. But I'll pause there.
Yeah, I had a similar path as well, although it took a little bit longer to get here. My first 5 years out of college were in nonprofit and public sector fundraising. So completely different. I call it the do-gooder sector. I thought I was going to save the world one fundraising event at a time, and pivoted into financial services after an MBA. And there I was a commercial underwriter. So making loans to companies, very large companies. And while it was interesting, I quickly realized I was like, I don't really want to be a banker. And so found myself drawn to more of the project implementation type projects at Citibank. And once I sort of grew tired of that in the commercial banking business, I moved over to credit cards in a pure product management role. And that was the first time. But that was, 10, 12 years into my career before I made that switch. And then I finally was like, I found my sweet spot. This is the mix of the things I really like to do and I'm good at doing, but also sort of keeps you on your toes. There's plenty to learn. There's plenty to challenge yourself. The problem solving aspect was pretty great. And so anyway, spending a few years at Citi doing that before I moved to Greenlight into the FinTech space. So this is my first foray really into pure tech.
Amazing, amazing. And it's interesting because you both have already had like a natural interest within sort of financial services. So I guess it was kind of like almost destined really to kind of combine that to the technology piece. And as FinTech's seen a lot of explosion over the last few years, it's quite nice to see how you guys have kind of transitioned into it. Do you find that having coming from that kind of financial services background, especially with dealing with those types of products and that type of industry as well, has given you almost sort of like a slight advantage when moving into FinTech? Because obviously FinTech is probably more technology focused, less than sort of like a traditional financial services focus sometimes. But do you guys both feel like maybe that kind of having that traditional finance background has really helped you guys?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think even in the hiring that I do today, or that my teams do today, I would say we tend to give candidates a preference if they have some experience in traditional finance or some adjacent area, right, like regulatory or compliance or et cetera. But I think for me, absolutely, my personal journey started at Schwab. And so, a company that is, if there are two things you can say about Schwab, it's first, they're maniacally focused on customers, and it might be one of the most risk-averse group of people on earth. So, like those two things actually create kind of a really interesting, you have to make trade-offs, right? When you're really, really focused on what the customer wants, because the customer, in some cases in financial services, will want to push the envelope a little bit on what they can do, right? And I worked a lot in options, and so that trader type persona tends to want to really push the envelope. So I think the mix of having a compliance background or some experience with some of these companies that have really figured it out, like Simone is at Citi or Schwab, like you can learn some really incredible lessons from those places, and they have incredible compliance teams and regulatory teams and legal teams that are unpacking all the regulation. And so as you move into product and really understand how the technology is structured, you can start to weave that into what you're doing. Something as simple as, the names of databases or the ways that you market or position your products can actually have really serious implications for the company. And, whether you get called by the Fed or the SEC. And so, nobody wants that, right? And so I think having that background and just that lens that there's actually certain words that you can't even use. They just tend to trigger regulators. But if you haven't been in it, it's hard to, know what that list of, quote unquote phrases is. But yeah.
I totally agree. It's the regulatory framework. It's also an understanding of risk, right? So as you're structuring financial products, having a sense for like, what are the kinds of things that, an internal risk function would be concerned about that could go wrong, that could harm customers, like forget regulators for a moment, right? And so that fundamental understanding of like how financial products, if not done well, can hurt people is sort of like an underpinning tenet of like banking experience. And so, I certainly very much value my banking experience coming into FinTech. And I think that you are ultimately a stronger product manager in this space with at least some amount of time, to Erik's point, because I just, you sort of understand the language, and you also understand like how customers are even viewing you, right? Like we are sort of competing against banks, whether we like it or not, right? Like neobanks, FinTech challengers, we're all sort of competing. So like understanding how the customer sees banks is also really valuable for us to figure out how we play and how we position ourselves.
No, I love those points as well, and it's quite a common thing as well. I do see people coming in from that background because that gives you that natural empathy, doesn't it, for the customer base? And but at the same time, I have seen some incredible professionals who've come from very, very rogue backgrounds of very different industries and kind of made that transition. But yeah, it's good to see how you guys come into it. And moving on to that, like Erik, you touched on a really interesting point about like some of the challenges on like regulation and being called by the SEC, which must be scary. But yeah, like in terms of some of the challenges that I guess you guys face, sort of like entering the industry, or even some of the more interesting challenges that you faced along your career, sorry, in this within sort of FinTech product management.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that experience where you have to meet with the Fed or you have to meet with the SEC or whoever, and I can tell you that if you get to that point, and your products are not architected well, and you haven't thought through all of the edge cases, and you haven't really pushed the envelope on like, is this the right thing to do for the consumer and the right thing to do for the company? You're probably too late. Like you have to go into those meetings, and those usually a lot of the decisions that you'll talk about with regulators were made 2 and maybe 3 years earlier. So you have to be really careful there. I think regulation and compliance is absolutely a challenge in FinTech, and it's changing. Actually, just this morning, I was reading an article about 6 things that have changed in the last like 10 days. You know, and one of them, as simple as the CFPB is now invoking this rule where they can start to regulate or look at non-bank entities or other quote unquote FinTech apps that do FinTech type services for consumers, but they're not banks. And that's an entirely new paradigm, right? But I think that you also once you get like into product and you're doing product management, one of the really difficult things, aside from regulation, is the complexity of all these products. So FinTech, I think all consumers can say, yes, it's made our lives way easier. I can send my kids an allowance, or I can give Bitcoin to my brother for his birthday very quickly with a few taps. However, the problem for product people is now, if you're looking to buy or partner with a company, or you're looking to find a BaaS provider or whatever, the world's incredibly complex. The barriers to entry are really low for these companies. So you have to do a lot of due diligence. So regardless of whether you have FinTech experience or not, you could come from Uber, Facebook, doesn't matter. As long as you know how to do due diligence and really think deeply about how do I formulate a product when I'm using partners, vendors, and all these other things to make something that's going to work for my company and find product market fit, and then also work for the consumer. Pretty challenging, but that's something that I see my team personally, we struggle with a lot is, you know, we were trying to find a data product recently, and we had 15 options. How do you go through 15 options at scale and try to find the one that's absolutely the best that's going to serve your needs? So it's incredibly difficult now. That wasn't the reality 3 to 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear you talk about that also, because one of the big things that was sort of an adjustment in mindset, doing product at a large enterprise where everything is essentially in-house, very little of what you're doing is with partners or vendors. I mean, to some extent, but those vendors, by the way, have been there for decades and are basically a part of the company at some point, right? To going to a smaller FinTech where you are just working with a lot of partners and vendors. And so you're not the influencing skills that you need as a product manager internally versus influencing with someone who doesn't even work at your company. Totally different sort of mindset shift. And not that it can't be done, obviously it can be done, but it does increase the complexity pretty dramatically in terms of how quickly you think you can move, right? You can think like, all right, yes, we're scrappy, we're going to move really fast, but like, oh yeah, I have to like make sure I engage this whole other company to make sure they're on board with the scrappy move that I want to make, right? So the complexity does get pretty intense.
Yeah, I think it's always an interesting one because I speak to a lot of people from, especially from the like larger companies, as you mentioned, like they're so used to have, like, you obviously have a lot more resources there, like you've got a lot of things that you can be using, and then when you go into some of these smaller startups, and you mentioned me buying Scrappy and things like that, I guess it's a huge challenge just kind of adapting to, oh wait, I'm kind of on my own a little bit here. I've got like resources, but it's not like nowhere near the same as I used to have.
Right.
How did you guys like find that time when you first moved from like a big sort of corporate, I guess, type company? I think it'd be quite interesting to hear. How did you guys move into like a really like small kind of startup or into that sort of much faster paced environment?
I mean,
I'll let Simone start. I think she has the most interesting experience here.
To be totally honest, it was a real pill to swallow. The reasons I left Citi was very good to me. I had a great career there. But ultimately, I just felt like I had much more energy to like do stuff than I felt like Citi could contain. And so making the move to FinTech was like absolutely the right thing. But I was used to processes out the wazoo. Unfortunately, a ton of bureaucracy, but it just meant that literally every use case that you'd want to do in a job had been considered and thought of. And there was a team for that and a process for that a form to fill out for that. And coming into FinTech, there was nothing. I mean, there was a few things, but it just meant that like the intensity of my days, whereas like I was certainly kept very busy at Citi, the intensity of my days to figure out even just the smallest things, but it was so much more hands-on and so much more exciting. So it was a pretty big adjustment. I think it probably took me a good 3 or 4 months to sort of, okay, we're just going to do things really differently, lower the expectations in terms of like what's available to you. And you're going to build it. You're going to help this company build it. Right. So it was exciting for sure. But it teaches you a lot about yourself, about, what is the phase of growth in a company that you really jive with. I've learned that mega large corporate, not my jam. But I'm also learning about what phase of a startup is more my jam, right? So anyway, it's been a really interesting ride.
And yeah, I feel like I'm listening to my own story. It's very, very similar.
Yeah.
I went from Schwab to a startup company, and very, very much the same experience. We at Schwab, we had everything was buttoned up, everything from incentive plans to employee surveys and everything. And then I went to this place and immediately had direct reports that had never written a performance review for an employee before. And I was like, I don't know what's happening. I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. So I think for me, I really had to, number one, change my mindset to, at first you kind of look at it, you're like, oh, this company's lacking all these things. You have to shift your mindset and be like, oh, these are a ton of opportunities for me to have some influence on the direction of the company. And of course, there was things that Schwab did that I didn't like, that I felt were really slow, and they didn't really serve the customer, which was the employee in a lot of cases. So you have this opportunity to have influence. The second thing I realized was, at large companies, you're really used to making sure that all of your documentation and all of your thinking and your presentations and everything is very, very buttoned up before you present it to the world, so to speak. And I found that the opposite is actually much better for people. And I've seen people develop much faster, myself included, when you start with an idea, you write out as much as you can, you document what you can, and then you start collaborating with somebody else. And the goal should be to get your thinking out there as fast as possible so that somebody can challenge it and tell you you're on the wrong path. And so you kind of have to shift your brain from like, I have to make sure that this is perfect before I show people, to I want this to be very imperfect, but yet I want to show it to people fast so that I get feedback. And I think for a lot of people, that is a hard thing. In fact, I just had this conversation with somebody on my team the other day. It's like, look, this thing needs to be perfect before we show it to the C-suite. I said, no, that's not what we want. Let's get in front of them now and start to get ideas. And we'll go back and retool it 5 or 6 times before we meet with them. But let's get it in a place where we can start to get feedback. And I found that the velocity of work and everything starts to improve, collaboration, people have more respect for one another. And it's actually ironic that when you kind of show your vulnerability at something you're writing and you're thinking, and that maybe it's not perfect, what happens is everybody else starts to think better and they start to write more. And so you get a little bit of a viral loop inside the company, and products can start to be developed much faster when people are really less concerned about perfection and more about getting the objective or the outcome. And so that was a huge thing for me. Schwab is a very buttoned up organization. And a lot of these startups are literally the opposite, but you just have to shift your mindset and kind of go with it and say, you know what, I'm just going to put my stuff out into the world and see what people think. And it can be kind of empowering too, because you get feedback from people like, oh, this is amazing, but what about this and this and this? And you're like, you just start to, formulate thoughts differently. So
I love that.
I'd love to respond to that if I may, Raman,
Sure.
because Erik, you like nailed it on, I think the big distinction is the amount of personal and professional growth that you get from startup world versus large corporate. I've grown tremendously in corporate world, and that's been hugely valuable to me. But in just a short time, I'm amazed at what I feel confident doing, including that, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, you can go in and meet with this vendor and like feel confident about what you're bringing to the table, or going into the C-suite. Like, it's huge. And there's something to be said for that. So like, you know, I obviously am biased, right? I feel that both experiences bring a lot of value. So like highly encourage people to do both. But you nailed it about just like that professional growth that you can experience just by like moving quickly, getting agile, getting collaboration quickly. It's so valuable.
No, I love that. I think, yeah, the speed of iteration really comes up in a lot of the conversations, and yeah, I guess and helps on development as well. And just looking forward as well, like what I love about both of you is you've both come from slightly like B2B and B2C backgrounds. It'd be good just to understand a bit about some of the products within the sort of fintech space that you think are that really excite you in particular, or you think are going to be really interesting either now at the moment or looking forward as well. I reckon AI is going to come up. I'm just going to say that now, but but yeah, it'd be good to hear from both of you what you're things you're excited about.
So you want to start, or you want me to start?
I don't know if I have necessarily anything groundbreaking. AI was going to be one of the things I was thinking about, but more so in terms of personalization. Like there is a trend toward personalization happening anyway. You'll see it within your marketing, within your app experiences. But it's really interesting to me to see how we could use that more meaningfully, specifically in fintech. Like, how can we start to help people understand their finances in a more intuitive way that actually helps them build the healthy money habits? So like, you know, you hear people talk about budgeting all the time, and everybody wants to budget, but nobody actually budgets. And part of that is because it's like, it's not easy. You have to like remember, like, I didn't track it today, right? It's sort of like an annoying thing. But if you think about the opportunity to have your technology actually sort of walk through your finances with you and sort of bring you along the way and help you sort of build those money habits as you move through the world, I think is really interesting. And I'm wondering, like, how can AI help people do that? Anyway, there's a lot of applications obviously for AI, but you know, clearly the space that I'm in, that's sort of what gets me excited.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I do think personalization is incredibly powerful, and I think it's particularly in the fintech space. I think the things that actually excite me are some of the more basic things, like speed, simplicity, and utility. You know, I'm sure the number of people on this call that have gone to a bank branch in the last 7 days is probably less than 5%. Right? I mean, think about it. We live in a world where your bank is in your pocket, your financial advisor's in your pocket, right? Like everything is on your wallet, everything is on your phone. And because of that, like the utilitarian value of financial services actually make the combination of finance and your phone become one of the most powerful things in your daily life. So, I mean, who doesn't go throughout their day and doesn't think about finances or paying a bill or transacting with some other person or paying somebody for lunch or whatever? Everybody does, right? And now you have a tool that gives you the ability to do it in a super fast, simple way. You know, if you look, one thing that's actually really interesting from a product perspective is this thing that Visa is now doing with PayPal and Cash App, and they're going to create essentially a mechanism to allow people to port money between P2P type apps without having users on board to both. Super interesting concept, but if you start to look, like the utilitarian value of fintech apps is just going to completely change the way that we interact with money. You know, the idea that I can have my tools and you can have your tools, but we can still transact without all the friction, I think is incredibly powerful. I've worked in AI, and I can tell you, it's not a hammer; it's a nail. It definitely requires a very specific problem to solve. I think if you're a product person, you know, it's like microservices. It can be incredibly powerful, but it could also hurt you if it's not done right. So make sure that you have a problem and a thesis, and you have an objective and an outcome you're trying to achieve before you embark on this journey of just going and doing it. Now, some companies have the resources and a budget to be able to do some exploratory things. And I think if you're in one of those situations, absolutely take that opportunity to do it and be innovative. But if you don't have that, and if you're really focused on your OKRs or whatever it is at the moment, I would say you have to have a thesis and some type of problem that you're trying to solve before you just start messing with ChatGPT and, you know, whatever. So anyways.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And I think what would be interesting, and it's just even onto the actual product management piece as well, is for you both, obviously, big fans of like upskilling yourselves and improving yourselves as in that sort of product manager space, whether that's being, very hands-on or kind of moving up into that sort of those managing positions, really helping some of these individual contributors to grow and excel them. I guess what's one really interesting trend that you both within sort of like product management in general that you feel is really coming up into this space, or you think that's going to be starting to be a big thing maybe the rest of this year or moving forward in the short term? Just like one trend that you think is really interesting within product.
Well,
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Simone,
sorry.
please. No, you're
I
good.
was
Go
just
ahead.
thinking, I was thinking about sort of the moment that we're in right now, right? Where the financing is not as strong as we had 3 years ago, right? And so some of the things that I'm really interested in seeing from products going forward is the idea of product-led growth. So how do you build, automatic growth within your product construct such that it's an easy thing that could essentially go, viral, right? And so often that could be like, I think about, what Venmo did, which is pretty cool, right? I mean, all they did was make peer-to-peer payments really fast and easy, awesome. But adding that social component, being able to bring your friends in simply and easily, and then creating sort of that social element that, you can opt in or opt out of, I think created a tremendous amount of growth for them, built right into the product. I imagine they must have spent a lot of money on their customer acquisition costs, but I think being able to think about how do you build that kind of inherent growth into your product, particularly in this environment, I think is so important, and definitely a trend that we're going to start to see more of, I think.
And Erik, sorry, thank you.
Yeah, I think Simone makes a good point. I think the environment is different. And, if you acknowledge that and kind of look at what's happening in both FinTech, VC funding, both the public and the private markets, like life is just a little bit different right now. And when you're in major bull markets, I think what happens to product people is they tend to lose a lot of their discipline. So, internally, it's easy to get money for promotional things or innovation or additional resources. When the world constrains a little bit, you have to really learn to be disciplined. And so I think, at least in 23 and 24, I think one thing that's going to be interesting is really kind of classical PM skills. So do you know how to do customer discovery? Do you know how to write user stories? Do you know how to write PRDs? All these things sound incredibly boring, but they're basic and they have to be done. And I think a lot of PMs that will succeed in the current environment are the ones that can really be disciplined product people, look at product as a craft, and really trying to hone that craft. But look at things that, early Silicon Valley did really, really well, right? They tried to find a problem. And then when they found a problem, they did the customer discovery and the customer research to figure out what exact problem we're solving. They didn't rely on their own thinking. And so I think concepts like that will be big. I think at least at Zero Hash in our company, we really focus on like consistency, doing things consistently. We optimize the product process, but we don't over optimize the thinking. So we really want people to focus on thinking deeply, but the way that we get it down on paper is consistent. So that helps us save time and money and velocity, and create velocity. So I think really those classical PM skills, and candidly, every company is different, and it's becoming harder to find folks that have like that really strong classical product thinking and can be able to take something from ideation all the way to the end where they're working with marketing and sales to get something launched. And so I think those will be popular skills. I don't know how you get all of those. It's kind of everybody has their own journey. But it just seems like those become much more powerful when the environment changes.
I think.
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking like, as you were talking, Erik, as you think about how do you upskill, either whether it's in your own company or elsewhere, like getting experience in different domains, right? Because it allows you can't lean on your domain knowledge, right? You can't say like, well, I'm a FinTech person and I know savings accounts and like, this is what I know, right? If you're bouncing around different types of product jobs, you have to always be in learning mode. You have to be always in discovery mode, which I think forces the best ideas. And I think forces some of that innovation, because you're coming at it with fresh eyes, and you really have to rely on those core basic skills like you just described to really get you through your new product job.
Thank you, Jen. And Simone, just coming to you first actually on this. I guess within like the B2C environment, what do you think is like a real typical sort of like types of challenge that you see just within that kind of B2C world, and kind of empathizing for consumers that you see sort of like young PMs do, or challenges that they tend to face within that environment, like just within that kind of B2C world? What do you kind of feel can be?
I think it's a common thing. Every product manager does this, but it's something that I actively want to fight, and I do try and fight, is that people often defer to themselves when thinking about what would be best for the customer. I think we should build X because my kid or my spouse or what have you, or I've done things in this way. And so therefore, my customer must want to do them in the same way. And the reality is you are a sample size of one. And though that may be valuable insight, you still need to go back to the data and the research to really validate that hypothesis. Does that really extrapolate to a larger population? And, research is hard, right? Like I've definitely met many product people who are like, customers don't always know what they want, right? So you can interview them, you can do surveys. They don't always know what they want. And how can you validate some of your hypotheses with real tests, like a painted door test, where, you put something in front of them, get them to click a button and sort of gauge their visceral reaction, their immediate reaction to something you put in front of them. Sometimes that can be more effective. But I think it's okay to sort of start with the insight from like your own personal experience, but like always backing that up with some research, because you just don't want it to lead you down the wrong path. And customers are fickle, right? It's hard to build B2C products. It's hard to build products, period. But like B2C is hard, right? And so you want to try and hang your hat on some meaningful research beyond just, this is my personal insight.
Well, love that. Thank you. And Erik, for B2B?
Yeah, this is something that I personally struggle with. I think you get really focused on what your objectives are as a company in B2B. So you're really focused on landing, whales, if you will, large customers. And we work with some of the best B2C brands in the world, and particularly in the United States. And the challenge we have, and I think this is a challenge for anybody that works in B2B, is you have to take a step back sometimes and really figure out how do I look through my relationship with my client and really understand who they're serving, and really understand what are their OKRs, what are their objectives, what are the metrics that they're trying to drive? Are they trying to drive in-app engagement? Are they trying to drive transactional engagement? Like what are they trying to do? In B2B, you get really, really focused on landing a big deal, doing the implementation, integration, getting them up and running, giving them API docs and all those types of like standard things. But if you want to be a really, really good product manager, you've got to look through your customer and really understand who's their customer. What are their objectives? What are they trying to do? Who do they serve? We serve a really wide range of B2C customers. And I can tell you, they almost all have different user personas. Now, on our side, that becomes very difficult to manage because you have to try to at least have some understanding of all these different types of users. But it at least gets you to a place where you can try to construct better products so they can facilitate growth. That's really our objective, is to get our customers to grow faster. But in order to do that, you really have to understand who they're trying to serve and what they're trying to achieve on a daily basis. And it can get pretty difficult, right? Because you're really focused on the day-to-day. But I think the best product folks are the ones that can kind of look through from a B2B perspective and really understand what their customers trying to do.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. And just going to open up some of the Q&A stuff now at the moment as well. And these questions are just coming to me from my head as well. But yeah, no, so we've got one here actually would you say that you folks caught the startup bug? And would you say that the beginning of your career in the corporate environment helped you to mature your skills? We can start with Simone.
I don't know that I've caught the startup bug, to be very honest with you. I mentioned earlier that, you learn a lot about yourself in terms of what stage of growth of a company you best fit with. And I've learned that like probably a Series A or Series B company, probably not for me. But I will say that my whole career, like 100% prepared me for where I am now. Like, I only spent, I think 3 years in product before I moved into FinTech, into pure tech. But I had spent 3 years as a fundraising consultant. I had spent, 2 years as a chief of staff, right? All kinds of skills that I picked up in those kinds of jobs that you wouldn't expect, that helped me bring the right mindset, at least, to then learn the product specific skills, right? The being able to write a user story, being able to conduct customer research. So there's obviously, discipline specific things you learn, but I had all the skills that could get me there. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess you could say that because I haven't really done anything else since I left Schwab, so I guess that's true. But I have a very specific. I know I know myself, and I know where I'm not good, and I know where I'm good, and I can tell you kind of Series A to E-ish exit type area is like my sweet spot. Beyond that, when companies start to get to like 1,800, 2,000 employees, you're starting to crack that like $1 billion revenue type area. That's just not. It's not for me, and I'll probably go find something else. I just don't. The way my brain works, it just doesn't equate with me. So. Sure. I think that's important for everybody, though. Really know like what stage of companies that you like to be at, and then position yourself, because there's a unique problem set that is typically associated with each company, each revenue stage, whether it's 0 to 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 100. There's a kind of a unique problem set for each of those stages.
No, thank you. And that's really interesting. Yeah, and I just thought of another really interesting one, which is for you both, what's like I don't know how much you can disclose here. What's your favorite product that you guys have launched ever, and why was it your favorite one? And this could be maybe outcome based, I don't know, but it'll be cool just for some people to hear like what some of the outcomes are of being like a product person, and kind of some of the things you get to build. We can start with Simone.
It was pretty cool. It was the closest in my time there, the closest I saw Citi get to really being nimble and quick. And it was during COVID. It was, I think it was literally April 2020 when my manager came to me and said, we got to do something for COVID. Here are a few ideas. And one of the ideas was, how can we, for a brief time, how can we allow customers to use the rewards that they earn on a credit card? We're used to getting rewards all the time for miles and for travel and whatever. How can we let them use those rewards to pay their monthly bill? And for context, it is actually, you will never find a bank that will allow it, because there are regulatory requirements. They want to know that you can at least make your minimum monthly payment. And so they'll never allow it. And I think we did it for like 3 months. We allowed customers, and we actually ended up extending it because it was so popular. But the big, feat for us is that from beginning to end, we were able to get that out of the door in 3 or 4 months, which is unheard of at Citi. Like everything takes a year. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Everything takes a year. And I was really proud of that, because I was like, it was probably easily 300 people involved in that initiative, between all the people who have to approve it. You have to go to certain committees that go very senior up in the bank. We actually had to get regulatory, not necessarily approval, but sort of alignment, right? There was a lot of work that went into that. And it felt good to be able to help customers who may have lost their jobs in the throes of the pandemic, be able to like give them a little bit of relief. Like, hey, you've stacked up $300 worth of rewards. Well, listen, that could pay your minimum monthly payment for the next 6 months. And like, we want to be able to do that for you. And so anyway, it was a pretty cool project to be a part of and to feel like I could really do something meaningful to help customers.
I love them. Yeah, I love the mission driven element.
That is tough to beat.
I'm sorry. I was thinking it was pretty mundane. I'm like, it's like it's the world's tiniest little feature, but it had big impact.
But I think the moral of that story is like, if you're a product person, there's very little that makes you more excited than like helping customers, right? Yeah. So mine is it's kind of similar. It's actually a really boring thing. I launched retirement accounts at SoFi, and it seems like, oh, everybody has retirement accounts. You can get an IRA at like a million places. But the reason it was interesting is because our mission as a company was to help people get their money right. And everybody's probably seen SoFi's commercials, right? It was about the whole company is oriented to that. And watching people, once we launched retirement accounts, watching people save for retirement and knowing that those funds, and watching the growth in the product, those funds were not for tomorrow. They weren't to pay their electric bill or whatever. That was to help people retire, and the objective. And we knew that people were saving for their future, which is an incredibly powerful thing to watch, right? I think in this country, we definitely have a problem with retirement savings. If you go and look at the percentage of corporate employees that save in their 401k and actually max out their corporate match, it's very, very low. And so, anything that can help customers get their money right or do better or be more focused on their personal financial picture, I think is incredibly powerful. And so that one was a fun one. We launched it really fast. We had a very short window. We were coming up on tax season. And so we had a really incredibly tight timeline to get the product out the door. And so it was a fun one, but candidly, kind of boring, but it was really the right thing for the consumer. We could have chosen to do, 5 or 6 other things that would have driven more revenue. But it really was the right thing for the consumer. So those ones always feel good.
Yeah, no, I love that. And we are running slightly out of time, but I'd love to ask this just a quick question here, actually, which is, are there any sort of like product organizations that you folks are sort of following right now, then you're trying to like mirror their success almost? Start with Erik.
Oh, man. Yeah, I would say, gosh, there's a ton of incredible ones. I kind of have a personal love affair with like some of the product stuff that comes out of companies like Intercom, Twilio. Ironically, most of these are not in FinTech. I think companies like Uber, if you watch what they've done over the last year and a half, 2 years with CEO change, the product has just gotten incrementally better. You can tell the company is moving at much faster velocity. Those are some of my favorites. I think they just have really great product discipline. There's some on the security side like CrowdStrike and Okta. I think these companies just have incredibly powerful technical product teams. But if you go and you look at their documentation and how they interact with users, it's just masterful the way that they deploy their products, number one, and then communicate with their customers.
That one's a hard one. I think my answer to that is actually based on some of the colleagues that I've got today at Greenlight. We have, within our product organization, we have folks who have come from Uber, Google, Venmo, and some really, really intelligent people who bring different ways of thinking about product to the org. I mentioned, so I joined, we are Series D, and very much building, very much a startup. And so every new person that we've brought into the product org has brought some, hey, at Uber, we used to do it like this. And we're like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's try that. This person comes from PayPal. Hey, with PayPal, we used to do it like this. That's great. Let's do that. And so you get to sort of pick and choose the sort of best practices that folks are bringing from their respective orgs. And it's sort of created a culture of, we're willing to try anything. If it works, and let's double down. And if it doesn't, we keep trying stuff. So those are some of the companies that some of our, internal best practices have come from. So it's been really great to learn from my partners and my colleagues.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. And there was just final. This one might be a quick picker as well, to be fair. But who are some of your most influential mentors in your career so far?
Oh man, I have one that I'll mention. He was a product person. He was. I won't share his name, but I'll just say that he runs the majority of cloud at Oracle. And he's just an incredible product thinker. He's a hard charger, but he's just a great person too. He's one of those people that I think has this really unique ability to understand how product development is done, and then also how to build his employees. And I think he's not immune to giving you very, very tough feedback, but the way he does it is just masterful. Like you feel like you can grow and develop under him. And he was just a very instrumental person for me in helping me with my product and candidly my strategic thinking. And I think everybody, if you don't have a mentor, if you don't have somebody that you can talk these things through with, you need that. I think it's in just an incredibly powerful way, especially as a product person, because there's no one single playbook for doing product development and product management. And so you need that person that you can kind of bounce ideas off of. But
Thank you. And Simone?
There's one person that jumps out. I also won't mention his name, but he was a serial entrepreneur who ended up joining City Ventures and was sort of a part of their incubation arm to incubate other entrepreneurs and startups. And we met sort of by chance through some new product development work I had been doing. And I go to him consistently for sort of macro view, what's he seeing, how he's thinking about FinTech, how he's thinking about startups more broadly, just so whip smart. And so I'm like, I just want to listen, like, tell me everything you know. And I find it hugely valuable to sort of be able to pull up and, step outside of what I'm working on in my company to understand the bigger picture and how it factors in. I agree with Erik, like having a mentor is hugely, hugely valuable. I don't know that I've had a product specific mentor per se, but I'm constantly learning, right? And so I mentioned my colleagues, like, just the other day, I'm thinking through what is the validation plan for the current initiative that I'm working on. And I reached out to a couple of my colleagues and just like, I want you to help me think through this. Like, here's what I'm thinking. Does this make sense? Is this the right way to go about it? Oh, well, at so-and-so company, we did it like this. So I think you can find mentors in a lot of people informally, in addition to formal mentor relationships as well. So I think for me, it's just always be curious, always stay learning, always asking questions. You never know where the nugget comes from that helps you sort of go to that next level. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Awesome. And I think just to kind of wrap things up, I think what will be good to hear from both of you would just be like almost like, I guess, like a one line or two lines about sort of advice that you'd give to aspiring product managers, or another way you could phrase it is if you had to go back, back to when you guys are starting out your careers, like what advice would you give yourself? It's a tough one.
I'll give you two fairly quick ones. I think the first is learn how to write. And learn how to communicate succinctly on paper, learn how to distill your thoughts onto paper, learn how to think in a very formal fashion that can help other people understand what you're thinking. And what I think what that does in a lot of cases is it really helps people to think through all the edge case and the parameters of building a product that maybe you wouldn't think through. Everything from why are we doing this to what do the microservices potentially look like, to how are we going to test, how are we going to roll out. If you go through the entire product lifecycle and try to get it on paper, and you can get to do that very well, you will be incredibly valuable at any company, FinTech or not. The second is actually self-awareness. I think product people, you should be less of a technologist and more of a psychologist. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to have all the ideas. In fact, that doesn't even matter. But if you are the most masterful communicator and collaborator and psychologist in the room, you can get anything built and you can achieve any customer need, any objective if you're a great psychologist and you understand other people and how to work with them. And so I think self-awareness and psychology, they're actually a big deal in product management. Your whole job is working with people. And so I think, we spend a lot of time focusing on app development and all these things, but the reality is it's people that use it and it's people that are going to help you build it. And if you don't understand those two cohorts and how to work with them and how to get them what they need, what their motivations and objectives are, then you're missing the boat. So.
Awesome. And Simone?
I don't know how I can follow that, Eric, because I think that was perfect. The only thing I will add is if you don't make it into product right this moment, I guarantee that whatever next job you take, it will still prepare you for product. Like there's no one even within my current company that has the same background. Almost no one has started out in product and has been in product their whole career and has learned the skills that Erik just described along the way that prepared them for the product role. And so I think you can end up in product in a number of ways. I totally agree also that this is a people job first and foremost. The stakeholder management, my goodness, you could mess up your product. You could think, this product didn't really nail it. And unfortunately, my metrics aren't great. But if you took all your stakeholders along with you and you built that in collaboration with all of your partners, everyone rises and falls together and you can, live to see another day. And so I would say, stay positive, try a lot of things, be curious, keep learning, and you'll find your way to product if that's what you want to do.
Guys, thank you so much. Like, I think we can go for hours, can't we? But yeah, much appreciated for your time. Like, it's been amazing. I think people would have found so much value in everything you guys have said. So yeah, thank you very much for joining, guys, and thanks everyone listening, either live or on the recording. It's been great. And yeah, we hope to have another one sometime. But thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.